Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If. This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku fought beside Yuji Itadori. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Sukuna warned not to underestimate him and declared that he was a curse. Itadori sighed as Sukuna faded away like dust in the wind. He had tried to convince the King of Curses to return to his body, even if no one would accept him, but in the end Sukuna could not be persuaded. Itadori stayed kneeling for a long moment and reflected on everything that had happened. Everyone had given their all to defeat the King of Curses in the Battle of Shinjuku, yet Itadori was the only one left standing. He remembered his friends and comrades who had died to give him a chance to end the cycle of curses. He snapped back to reality when he saw Megumi lying unconscious in the rubble. Itadori rose and walked toward him, the wounds and exhaustion taking their toll, then sat beside Megumi to catch his breath. Itadori thought he should regroup with everyone and check whether Tadu and Hana were badly hurt after that black flash Sukuna had unleashed. Suddenly the ground trembled and darkness began to spread across the terrain. Itadori watched the earth start to open, swallowing everything nearby, and wondered if Megumi had caused it. He grabbed Megumi and tried to escape the forming void, but his legs were snared by the pit. As a last-ditch effort, Itadori threw Megumi away from the origin of the darkness and began thrashing in desperation as he sank deeper and deeper. He wondered if this was Sukuna's final attempt to kill him. Only his head remained above the churning surface before he was pulled fully under. Itadori clung to the hope that everyone would be all right. When he opened his eyes, he found himself floating in a black emptiness. Shards containing fragments of his memories began to form. Itadori tried to steer himself toward one of the fragments, then started to fall rapidly. Instinctively, he reinforced his legs with cursed energy and landed perfectly on a featureless floor. Around him there was nothing but dark void, but something glowed in the distance, and he walked toward it. In the distance stood a bench and a lone lamppost. With nothing better to do, Itadori sat and tried to make sense of the strange place. After a while a familiar voice told him that if he wanted to start anew he should head north, and if he wanted to return to his old self he should head south. A signpost then appeared, pointing in opposite directions labeled north and south. Itadori was confused and overwhelmed by the flood of information, but he realized he had to choose. He considered starting anew. He thought of the many people he cared about who were gone and decided he wanted to begin something new with the friends who remained, imagining that this was what they would have wanted. With that decision, he rose and walked north. When he came to, Itadori found himself on top of a pile of garbage bags in an alleyway. He winced and wondered how long he had been unconscious. A backpack lay on top of him. He lifted it and opened it, finding photographs of people he knew and some he did not. One man with a similar hair color holding a baby, and a woman with stitches across her head whose appearance unsettled him. He smiled faintly at the sight of his friends in the photos. After checking the backpack, Itadori examined himself and realized his injuries were healed, even the fingers he could not normally mend with reverse cursed technique, though his uniform remained torn and shredded. He noted that at least he would not have to heal himself, but he still felt drained after using his domain expansion for the first time. He decided to find out where he had been thrown. Ending up in an alleyway in the middle of nowhere was unexpected. Itadori thought it must be a dream. Around him he saw people who resembled animals, humans with unusual transfigurations, and a few wearing bright, distinctive costumes moving through the streets. He gathered his courage and asked a passerby what city this was. The man stammered that they were in Mizudafu, Japan. Itadori thanked the stranger and mused to himself that Mizudafu sounded like the planet from that space movie as he continued to take in his new surroundings. After a while, Itadori began to learn the strange ways of this place. Billboards advertised heroes, many of them praising All Might as the #1 hero, which intrigued Itadori as the city did not look very different from the ones he knew. While walking through a residential area, he heard a cry for help at an empty intersection and ran toward the commotion. He arrived to see a man trying to steal a woman's purse and grabbing her by the throat. The woman struggled and begged to be let go. Itadori threw a soda can and struck the assailant, who lost his grip on the woman and staggered back. The thug looked around and spotted Itadori. He taunted the newcomer and rushed forward, relying on his quirk to attack with incredible speed while preparing a heavy strike. Itadori took a fighting stance and moved to defend himself. He ducked under the first attack, avoided the following barrage, and then delivered a powerful kick that sent the assailant tumbling to the pavement. The attacker tried to run, thinking he might escape, but Itadori closed the distance in an instant. He tackled the man and executed a quick, decisive maneuver that rendered him unconscious without excessive force. The woman slowly regained her composure and expressed her gratitude. Itadori offered a reassuring smile and explained that he had come because he heard the commotion. The woman called the police. While the woman looked away, Itadori took some money and a phone from the unconscious attacker. He justified the action to himself because he had no money and did not want to beg. He stayed nearby until the sound of approaching sirens and then left the scene. After the scuffle, Itadori wandered until he found an internet cafe and began searching for information about the world he had stumbled into. He discovered a society where many people had Quirks' unique abilities that heroes use to fight villains. He noticed that nobody appeared to use cursed energy in those videos. To himself, he quietly tested his own power by enveloping his fist with cursed energy, unseen by those in the cafe. When he left, it was already sunset. Worried about where to sleep, Itadori pictured spending the night on a park bench and shivered at the thought of being robbed or kidnapped if villains were about. He remembered that a friend had once given him practical advice about finding temporary shelter without needing identification. He searched through the night and eventually found a small lodging that would take him for one night. He rented a room, took a shower, and, resigned to wearing the same clothes the next day, decided to sleep without his shirt. He lay down thinking that maybe someone in this world could help him return home, but he knew it was unlikely and told himself he would have to live here for now. The next morning, Itadori woke and tried to come up with ways to earn money. All the cash he had taken from the assailant had been spent on the one-night stay. He realized he could not get a legal job because he was underage and had no identification. He remembered underground fights he had joined before to make contacts, including one to reach a senior named Hikari who had been preoccupied with talking about something called the fever. So that's when he decided to search for one. Although he barely knew the city, Itadori had a general idea of how to look. It was morning, and he knew his best chance to find one would be at night, so he chose to get familiar with the city to avoid getting lost. He wandered aimlessly, aware of the wary looks people gave him. Itadori acknowledged to himself that he could not blame them for staring at someone with visible scars and clothes that looked like they had seen better days. Absorbed in his thoughts, Itadori accidentally bumped into someone and helped the person to her feet, apologizing and asking if she was hurt. The pink-skinned girl brushed it off and replied that he seemed to be the one who should be concerned. She noted that he looked rough around the edges with torn clothes and asked whether he had been in a scuffle, observing that people were staring at him like he was a villain. Itadori explained that he was new to the area. The girl offered to show him around since she had been wandering too, and teased that a peach-haired person must have a lot to say. Itadori accepted the offer and introduced himself as Yuji Itadori. The girl introduced herself as Mina Ishido. Ishido walked with Itadori around town, chatting about whatever came to mind and showing him landmarks that helped him get oriented. In the evening they arrived at Takoba Municipal Beach Park and watched the sunset, lamenting the state of the place. They soon noticed a green-haired boy struggling to pull a giant piece of junk along the sand while a shriveled blonde man watched over him. Ishido speculated that the boy might be training for the upcoming UA entrance exam, and Itadori asked if she was going to take the exam too. She enthusiastically confirmed that she wanted to become a hero despite not being strong at studying. Ishido and Itadori agreed they should talk to the boy and perhaps offer help, though Ishido protested at the size of the junk and warned that it would take hours to move it. Itadori insisted that helping someone was what a hero should do, and Ishido reluctantly agreed while warning that she would not be dragged around the city if she got hurt. Itadori approached the pair and offered to lend a hand, asking if they were trying to clean the beach. The blonde man explained that the green-haired boy, Midoriya, was training by cleaning the beach in preparation for the entrance exams. Midoriya, winded from the effort, denied that the newcomers were his friends and said he did not remember them from school. Ishido cut the awkwardness by introducing herself again, and Itadori returned the introduction with a wide smile, saying his name was Yuji Itadori. The blond man introduced himself as Toshinori Yagi and then mentioned his student Izuku Midoriya, who shyly responded that it was nice to meet them. As twilight deepened, Ashido announced that she needed to get home before her mother worried and said it had been nice chatting. Itadori also mentioned he had plans and hoped they might meet again at the entrance exam. They said their goodbyes, exchanged contacts, and Ashido promised to text him that night. Just as Itadori was about to leave, he noticed a black mask resting on a piece of metal scrap and thought it might be useful to conceal his identity if a fight came up. After leaving Ashido's house, Itadori heard people on the street talking about an exciting fight that had taken place and how the next one might be even more intense. That tipped him off to where underground matches were being held. That night he headed toward the edge of the city. The area felt worn down, and soon he spotted a group of people entering a dead-end alley with a door and a bouncer standing watch. He put the mask on and approached the bouncer, who gave him a serious look but ultimately let him inside. Itadori descended the stairs and entered a room filled with a cheering, raucous crowd gathered around a ring. He watched the matches to gauge the contestants' strength and skill. Confident he could rely on his own abilities, he considered joining, but before he could act, a contestant unleashed a powerful burst of electricity that struck the other fighter, ending the match in a dramatic, non-graphic fashion. The sudden display of power made Itadori reconsider his assumptions. He asked whether participating offered prize money, and the referee confirmed that winners received payment. Encouraged, Itadori stepped into the ring and fought several opponents over the next few hours. Most of them were not overwhelmingly strong even with quirks allowed, and Itadori tended to finish matches quickly. After one victory, another fighter jumped into the ring. This newcomer was more muscular with tiger-like characteristics and accused Itadori of defeating his chosen prey, clearly prepared to continue the confrontation. When the bell rang, the announcer declared that the hunt would begin. The Tiger Man charged immediately and rammed a fist into Itadori, sending him across the ring while the crowd cheered. The Tiger Man then swiped with his claws, attempting a brutal attack that Itadori narrowly avoided by ducking aside. The wall beside them was left with a deep scratch. Itadori took advantage of the opening and launched a series of punches to the Tiger Man's sides, forcing the man to groan and stumble. The Tiger Man attempted a double arm smash, but Itadori stepped back and avoided the blow, the impact cracking the ground between them. The Tiger Man charged again with a heavy fist, which Itadori met with one of his own. Their fists collided and sent a shockwave through the air. The Tiger Man commented that Itadori was strong for someone without a quirk and sent another punch at him. Itadori blocked with an arm and countered by channeling his cursed energy into an. The Tiger Man was thrown back but recovered quickly and swung to return the blow. Before he could follow through, Itadori landed a second strike that staggered him. Itadori then delivered an uppercut that made the Tiger Man reel, followed by a kick to the leg that forced him to his knees. Itadori finished the match with a final punch to the face that knocked the Tiger Man unconscious. The bell sounded, and Itadori was declared the winner. Itadori collected 154,276 yen from his accumulated winnings and from defeating a top fighter in the underground ring. He did not expect to win so much. He realized the money would let him buy clothes, get a phone, and finally eat properly after the past 2 days. Leaving the ring, he exited the underground and headed back into the city under the cover of night. In the late hours, Itadori stopped at a small noodle restaurant and ate a hot bowl. After not eating for 2 days, the meal tasted incredible and renewed his spirits. He paid with his winnings and then returned to a small hotel, booking another night. He considered getting some fake documents since staying in hotels every night felt strange, even if it was not uncomfortable. After showering and washing away the sweat from the fight, he lay on the bed and checked his phone. He smiled at the string of messages from Ashido. Ashido had sent several messages, repeatedly asking if he was awake. Itadori told her he had been out for a couple of hours and had been busy. Ashido apologized for forgetting and then asked what he was doing so late. She reminded him she had promised to text him back. Itadori assured her he would not have given her a random number. Ashido invited him to hang out again when she was free from school and suggested they go clothes shopping because Itadori looked like he needed new clothes. Itadori agreed to meet up when she was available. After replying, he set his phone on his chest and sighed. Maybe this place was not so bad after all. He drifted off to sleep, thinking about the day ahead. Later, Itadori woke early, shaken by a vivid dream. In the dream, Teacher Gojo had urged him to be more forward-thinking and to carry on the teacher's dream if anything happened to him. Itadori had imagined Nobara and Megumi standing by his side. Waking in a cold sweat, he reached for the backpack he had brought when he first arrived in this new world, grateful to find it by the nightstand. The photos inside were the only remnants of his old life and the only reminders of the world he missed. He murmured a promise to Teacher Gojo that he would do his best. Itadori took a moment to compose himself and then set out for a morning walk to clear his head and plan how to use the next 3 months before the UA exams. He did not know exactly what the exam would include beyond a written test, but he decided to focus on improving his cursed energy efficiency and the blood manipulation techniques that Noritoshi had instructed him to practice. He admitted to himself that he was not yet proficient with convergence and that he missed Choso's help, but he could not dwell on what he had lost. He resolved to get things right before the UA exams. He recognized that Shrine, the technique of the King of Curses, needed more output, and he believed that would come with use. Itadori devised a weekly schedule, 3 days dedicated to cursed energy efficiency and the remaining days to blood manipulation. With that plan set, he spent the rest of the morning eating and looking for a secluded place to train. Using his quirks in public would draw unwanted attention, so he searched until he found an abandoned playground hidden from view. Vines had crept through the equipment and rusted swings hung still an echo of its former life. As Itadori prepared to start training, his phone rang and startled him in the quiet space. Ashido called and he answered quickly. She teased him about forgetting their plans, and Itadori explained that she had not given a time, so he had not known when to arrive. Ashido apologized and agreed that Itadori could come by to pick her up. He remembered the street from the time they had parted before and told her he would come get her. They ended the call, and in the silence that followed, Itadori considered the work ahead and the choices that would shape his future. After the phone call, Itadori made his way to Ashido's home. Ashido was waiting outside, and Itadori grinned widely as they chatted about their day before heading to the mall to buy some clothes for him. Ashido noted that he had never said where he lived and suggested he tell her so she could pick him up next time. Itadori stared blankly and then, nervously, explained that it was better that he pick her up because his house was on the other side of the city and he did not want to tire her. Ashido looked confused. Itadori privately sighed that he needed to get some documents as soon as possible. He did not want to be stuck living in transient accommodations forever. Ashido suggested they head out before it got too late and asked if he was still wearing damaged clothes. Itadori admitted that all of his clothes were being washed that day, which explained why he had on the same outfit. Ashido pushed him toward the clothing racks with a confident claim that she had a good eye for fashion, and Itadori, skeptical but trusting, tried on jackets, shirts, pants, and shoes she recommended. Ashido complimented every outfit and encouraged him to buy everything. Itadori, surprised, mentioned that he did not have many other clothes, which made Ashido raise an eyebrow. When Ashido asked if his parents had bought him more clothes, Itadori flinched and explained that although they had, he tended to favor one outfit as his default. Ashido gave him a doubtful glare but did not press further. At checkout, Itadori bought the clothes and realized some pieces were high-end. The purchases drained much of the money he had earned from underground fights, which he lamented internally and resolved would mean he would have to return to the fighting circuit more often. After leaving the store, they explored a bit more. Itadori remembered he still had a stolen phone and decided to buy a new one with a new number because he did not want sketchy people contacting him. He returned Ashido to her home, then went to an abandoned playground to train his curse energy by reinforcing his body as long as he could manage. Later he returned to his lodging and decided to sleep early since he had nothing else planned. 3 months passed. Itadori settled into a routine of hanging out with Ashido, occasionally visiting Midoriya at the beach, practicing jujitsu, and earning money in the underground fighting scene. During that time, a sketchy man who had seen Itadori fight offered to produce fake documents. The documents were surprisingly authentic, albeit expensive, and with them Itadori secured a modest two-bedroom apartment with 2 bathrooms, a decent kitchen, and a living room. He bought picture frames and some furniture and sometimes studied with Ishido at her place because his time as a jujitsu sorcerer had left gaps in what he had learned in middle school. Itadori also mastered convergence, expanding his blood manipulation techniques and improving his curse energy efficiency, which made sustained jujitsu use and reinforced combat strategies more feasible. Still, some things occasionally slipped his mind. On the morning of the UA entrance exams, Itadori woke up excited. Ishido had told him that the school was prestigious and hard to get into, and the study sessions they had held together had given him confidence that he would at least handle the written portion. He went to the UA Academy with Ishido because they had grown close over the past months. When they arrived, they encountered Midoriya in the crowd. Itadori greeted Midoriya warmly, surprising the already nervous teen. Midoriya admitted that he was anxious about whether he would get in. Itadori reassured him, reminding Midoriya that he had trained hard these past months and that even if things did not go perfectly, effort mattered. Itadori added that they could look out for each other and that he was expecting great things from Midoriya. Midoriya became emotional at the encouragement, and Ishido looked surprised by Itadori's sincere words. Their moment was interrupted when a loud blonde-haired student pushed past and shoved Midoriya aside in an aggressive, anime-style move. Itadori and Ishido reacted with frustration. Ishido challenged the blonde, pointing out that there had been someone in front of him. The blonde turned and shouted angrily, demanding to know why they cared about Midoriya. The blonde dismissed Midoriya as useless, but Itadori's sudden, hostile glare cut him off and filled the area with unease. Itadori's peach-colored eyes briefly turned a deep, unsettling red, a hollow circle with a single pupil, and he warned Kaken that if he said another word he would make sure Kaken could never speak again. Kaken scoffed and left in frustration. Midoriya and Ishido were surprised and somewhat frightened by Itadori's abrupt change in demeanor. Midoriya explained that Kaken was his childhood friend and that this rough behavior was how he showed he cared. Ishido disagreed, and Itadori, in a serious tone, told Midoriya that true friends did not act like that and advised him not to associate with someone who behaved that way. Midoriya flinched and lowered his gaze, sad and conflicted. The 3 of them entered UA and took the written exams. Itadori struggled with the difficulty, sweating as he worked through the questions and relieved when the written portion ended. During the practical portion, President Mike explained that students would earn points by destroying robotic targets and warned that the robot-designated 0 points should be avoided. The students were then transported to a replica of a city. Itadori found himself placed in a different group from his friends, but felt confident since his opponents were only robots. President Mike urged them to begin, praising Itadori as he sprinted into the city and surprising many observers. Itadori moved through the streets with focused energy, dismantling the smaller, low-point robots with ease by amplifying his strength and speed and helping to evacuate civilians from danger. His scarred appearance made people hesitant to thank him, but he continued his work. When a 3-point robot attempted to sneak behind him, Itadori turned and unleashed a rapid flurry of strikes that sent the robot crashing into the 3rd floor of a nearby building, leaving onlookers stunned at the display of raw physical power. Then he noticed something far larger. A towering robot, the 0-point target, rampaging through the city and obliterating everything in its path. From the viewing area, the tiny mouse-like President Mike noted that the 0-point robot would give some students an opportunity to shine. A man with evident fatigue under his eyes observed that one student had been performing exceptionally well before the 0-point target was released. Niza mentioned the pink-haired student who had been efficiently dismantling robots while assisting civilians, and the tired man Aizawa remarked that the prominent scars on the boy's face suggested more experience than he let on. Aizawa wondered whether the boy's enhanced strength was the result of a quirk or something else, and the other teachers agreed that they needed to watch all students impartially. Itadori decided it would be best to avoid the 0-point robot, even if he could defeat it using his shrine ability. Doing so would attract too much attention and possibly be of no real benefit. Then he saw a brown-haired girl trapped beneath the giant robot's advancing hand and knew he had to act. Before he could move, he saw Midoriya launch himself at the robot and strike its head, disabling it with a tremendous blow. Itadori felt both shock and pride at his friend's bravery. Midoriya was falling rapidly after the impact, and Itadori leapt, slamming into the ground and using the momentum to catch him before he hit the pavement. Midoriya was unconscious and had suffered severe limb injuries in the fall. Itadori smiled with worry as he assessed his friend. The girl who had been saved approached and asked Itadori to tell Midoriya thank you when he woke. Itadori agreed and promised he would convey her gratitude. Itadori carried Midoriya as they finished the exam scenario. An ambulance arrived to take Midoriya to receive medical attention. Itadori reunited with Ishido, who was visibly worried about Midoriya's condition. Itadori assured her that Midoriya would be all right. He then accompanied Ishido home and said goodbye for the day before returning to his apartment to reflect on the events of the past few hours. Alone in his apartment, Itadori acknowledged to himself that this path would be harder than he had anticipated. He took a shower to clear his mind and, as he drifted to sleep, resolved that he would need to grow stronger for the sake of his friends. After the exams, he knew there was nothing to do but wait for the results, so he spent most of the week relaxing in his apartment and occasionally working on creating something in his spare time. He received occasional visits from Ishido and Midoriya, and the green-haired boy finally gave his phone number so they could keep in contact. On one such day, Midoriya came to Itadori's apartment to relax on the sofa, watch some movies, and talk about their experiences in the exams. Midoriya admitted that he had destroyed the massive robot on impulse. Itadori remembered to pass along the words of gratitude from the brown-haired girl, which made Midoriya blush. Itadori asked if Midoriya knew the girl, and Midoriya stammered that he had met her when he had been sent to another entrance to the city and she had caught him as he was about to fall. Itadori smiled and suggested it might have been destined, which flustered Midoriya and made Itadori laugh. Trying to change the subject, Midoriya picked up a photo of Yuji, Nobara, Megumi, and Gojo. Midoriya asked who those people were. Itadori fell quiet for a moment and then explained that they had been his friends. The tall white-haired man had been his sensei and had trained him alongside the others. When Midoriya asked more questions, Itadori promised to answer them one by one. Itadori described his black-haired friend Fushiguro as grumpy and quiet but caring when it mattered, and he remembered how Megumi had used his 10 Shadows technique to disrupt Sukuna while he was inside Itadori. He described the girl who had sat with them as Kujisaki, confident and strong-willed but someone who cared in her own way. The memory of her fate made Itadori uneasy, and a moment of silence fell over him. Midoriya noticed Itadori's sudden quiet and asked if he was all right. Itadori forced a smile and said he was just thinking of the good times he had shared with his friends. He added that Gojo, the BLNDFLD-wearing sensei, claimed to see clearly because of his special eyes, though most of the time he was laid back and playful, often teasing the others for attention. Itadori recalled an awkward misunderstanding that had left him with a lump on his head. Midoriya suggested they might all meet someday. Itadori explained that his friends lived in a distant town now that he was studying at UA, which made Midoriya suspicious, but he accepted the answer. A few moments of awkward silence passed before Midoriya's phone rang. After he finished his call, he told Itadori that his mother had said the envelope with the exam results had arrived at his house. He worried aloud about whether he had passed since he hadn't destroyed any robots. Itadori assured him that destroying the giant robot and saving the girl should count for something, and Midoriya brightened and promised to message Itadori with the results later as he got up and left. Itadori decided it was getting late and that he should buy groceries for dinner. He put on a jacket and headed to the nearest store. Walking down an empty street, he noticed a blonde girl in a school uniform sitting on a bench under a lamppost, softly crying. He moved closer to offer comfort and felt an odd unease as he approached. Before he could speak, the girl suddenly lashed out with a concealed knife. Itadori stepped back and ended up with a small cut on his arm. The girl wore a wide, excited smile and seemed unnaturally exhilarated. She said she thought he would look better with more blood on his face and then rushed him with a barrage of rapid strikes. Itadori dodged and managed to break her knife as he tried to disarm her. He attempted to restrain her, but she moved with unconventional, unpredictable motions and quickly produced another knife. She pressed on with precise attacks aimed high while Itadori focused on subduing her without causing serious harm. He asked why she was doing this, and she cheerfully replied that she only wanted a little blood. Itadori offered a calmer solution, telling her he could give her what she wanted if she would stop attacking. The girl hesitated and then asked with obvious weariness if he truly meant it. Itadori closed his eyes, concentrated, and formed a small blood orb in his palm, which surprised her. She asked whether he had a blood quirk, and Itadori admitted he did but avoided using it openly because it complicated things. He offered the orb for her to consume. The girl accepted and ate the orb, exclaiming that it was delicious. She said she had never met anyone who would willingly give her blood, and Itadori replied that people did not usually give their blood to strangers. The girl giggled and then said she had to go. She told him she did not want the police to catch her before they discovered she had attacked him as she fled. He called after her to wait, but she ran out of view. Itadori thought she was a crazy gal but not evil, and that perhaps they would meet again someday. Then he realized he had forgotten what he had been doing. The next day, Itadori woke to a knock on the door and found an envelope. He assumed it contained his UA results and, lying on the couch, opened it. A hologram of the number 1 hero, All Might, sprang to life and announced that Itadori had exceeded expectations. All Might summarized that Itadori had passed the written exam with a normal score, achieved a perfect score on the practical exam with 100 villain points, and earned 40 rescue points for helping others. The hologram showed Itadori saving people from robots and rescuing Midoriya in midair. All Might noted that Itadori had achieved the highest physical exam score of all time and emphasized that a true hero acted because it was right, running toward danger out of concern for others rather than seeking attention. With that, All Might welcomed him to you, and the hologram faded. Itadori reflected on All Might's words and the weight behind them. He remembered failing to save someone who had died because he had not been fast enough, and the times others had acted with callous disregard. Those memories still haunted him. Now, in this world, he had friends he cared about, and he resolved not to repeat past mistakes. His phone vibrated with messages from Ashido and Midoriya announcing their own success and suggesting they meet to celebrate. Ashido sent an exuberant message about passing. Midoriya admitted he had passed barely, and Itadori replied that he had passed as well. They agreed to meet at the park in the afternoon to relax before classes began, trading light teasing and jokes as they finalized plans. Itadori even ribbed himself with a joking self-reference when Ashido teased him. Itadori then thought about the replica of the special grade tool, Playful Cloud, mounted on his wall and decided it was time to imbue it with cursed energy. He recalled Gojo and Nanami explaining that cursed tools were created by long-term imbuement with cursed energy, and he remembered Tadu saying the tool scaled with physical strength, something Itadori had in abundance. The experiment had only etched a faint trace of energy into the tool so far. It remained a work in progress. He did not expect a miracle, but he hoped for results. A few days later, Itadori put on his school uniform and prepared to leave his apartment. He had spent the interim trying to recreate the cursed tool and had accepted that the process would be slow. Today, however, was the first day he would attend UA and meet his classmates. He hoped Ashido and Midoriya would be in the same classroom but wondered what the other students would be like after 3 months living in a world that had become his new normal. Walking to the school, Itadori noticed people staring, some surprised, some smiling, a few envious. He felt like a celebrity at times, though he tried to keep his focus. At the gates of UA, seeing students of all shapes and sizes in uniform made him feel welcome. He found he had been placed in Class 1A and felt a flutter of nerves. Jujutsu High had accustomed him to small class sizes, and this environment was crowded by comparison. He hoped he would make a good first impression as he opened the classroom door. Inside, students were already mingling. Ashido was talking with a couple of classmates, and Itadori stood in the doorway to take the room in. Heads turned, and a few students murmured to one another as they noticed him. He steadied himself and stepped forward, ready to start this new chapter. A spiky red-haired classmate, Eijiro Kirishima, called out and complimented Itadori's scars, which eased some of the tension in the room. Tenya Ida, the dark blue-haired student from the private academy Sumai, approached and introduced himself in a formal, robotic tone that left Itadori confused. Hantasiro made a light-hearted comment from the side, and the same blonde-haired student who had insulted Midoriya at the UA exams shouted at Itadori, prompting Itadori to sigh inwardly and think that the next 3 years might be long. Mina Ishido hurried up to Itadori with bright enthusiasm and explained that she had been surprised to see him on the same roster. Mina vouched for him, mentioning that she had known him for a while and that, despite his scars, he was a good person, which immediately lifted the classroom mood. She leaned in and reassured Itadori quietly that it was the first day and he would make friends, and Itadori whispered his thanks. A blonde and black-haired student praised Itadori for throwing a shot that had reached the 3rd floor of a building and asked whether it was a quirk. Itadori offered a modest response and, in private thought, acknowledged that while he had used cursed energy, most of that power had come from his natural strength. Kirishima expressed admiration and introduced himself cheerfully. Denki Kaminari also introduced himself. Itadori returned his own introduction and then realized Midoriya was missing from the class, which made him search around anxiously. Midoriya soon appeared and asked if he had also been assigned to Class 1A, making Itadori break into a wide smile at seeing his friend. Before either of them could say much more, a girl approached Midoriya with praise for his performance in the exam. Midoriya became flustered and admitted he had been helped by a timely announcement, and he thanked Itadori for what he had shared. The girl, Uraraka Ochako, complimented both boys on their feats during the exam and introduced herself, prompting Itadori to respond with his familiar, warm smile. He downplayed his actions and said he had helped because Midoriya was his friend. Conversation halted when everyone noticed a large lump on the classroom floor. The lump shifted and unfolded into a tired-looking man who had apparently been wrapped in a sleeping bag. The man identified himself as Shota Aizawa, their homeroom teacher, and his brusque greeting stirred a wave of murmurs. Aizawa produced P uniforms and instructed the students to change, explaining that they would be going outside for a test. As the students dressed, some noticed the scars that lined Itadori's body. Kaminari asked where the scars had come from and whether Itadori had been in an accident. Midoriya watched with concern. Itadori mentally chastised himself for forgetting about them and quickly offered a half-truth to explain. He said that he had always tried to help people even when it put him at risk, often getting injured because he lacked a quirk. He explained that he had learned to persevere and that helping others felt right, even if he did not always receive thanks. His calm smile and sincere words inspired surprise and admiration from his classmates, including Kirishima and Midoriya, who felt a growing respect for Itadori's selflessness. When everyone finished changing, Aizawa led the class outside holding a ball. He reminded Itadori that he had performed well in the physical exam and asked how far he could throw a softball. Itadori estimated at around 30 meters, recalling a time he had broken a football goal with a throw. Aizawa then asked him to try using his quirk, handed him the ball, and placed him inside a marked circle. Itadori focused, reinforcing his body with cursed energy, and put his full effort into the throw. The ball sailed with a gust that made everyone shield their eyes. Aizawa's device displayed a distance of 1,250 meters, which stunned the onlookers. Aizawa silently considered the result, noting that he had not seen any visible quirk activation during the throw and wondering whether Itadori might be quirkless. Itadori finished his inner thought as the frustrated blonde-haired student fixed him with a glare. The blonde-haired student made a frustrated sound under his breath. Another student exclaimed that the distance was 1,250 meters. Ishido found Itadori's throw entertaining, while Midoriya watched from the sidelines, visibly shaken. Itadori thought that no one had seen his cursed energy, so he would be safe to use it if anything happened. Aizawa's remark caught everyone's attention. He questioned whether that carefree attitude would last for the next 3 years and warned that the student with the lowest score on the test would be expelled. Itadori protested that expulsion on the first day seemed unfair. Aizawa countered that disasters were not fair and that everything outside the school could be against them. Itadori felt a gloomy connection to someone named Nanami as he listened. Aizawa explained that there would be further tests beyond this one and urged everyone to give their best. The class then moved through a series of physical and skill tests, each student using their quirks to their advantage. During the 50-meter dash, Itadori and Tenya took their marks. When the machine signaled the start, Itadori sprinted at top speed, causing the ground to crack slightly beneath him. The timing device registered 2.54 seconds as Itadori came to a halt. Tenya crossed with a time of 3.04 seconds and murmured to himself about how fast and strong Itadori was despite having no quirk. In the grip strength test, one student with many strong arms reached 540 kilograms. Itadori vowed to see how far he could push it and clenched the device with everything he had. The device registered 680 kilograms, and Itadori considered keeping the result to himself. Midoriya reacted with surprise when he saw the reading, and Itadori scratched the back of his head with a small smile. In the standing long jump, the blonde-haired student used an explosive quirk to boost himself past the starting sand patch, and another student fired a beam to propel themselves. Itadori leaped and landed well beyond both of them. The angry blonde-haired student resolved to beat the peach-haired student no matter what, while Itadori waved at everyone from a distance. In the sustained sideways jump, Itadori moved fluidly left and right and again placed first, impressing the class with his speed. As the tests concluded, Itadori watched Uraraka throw the ball, and it floated upward, disappearing from sight. The device displayed the word infinity, surprising everyone. Itadori wondered aloud whether the ball had gone as far as the moon. Midoriya prepared to test himself and struggled at first, prompting Aizawa to speak privately with him. Midoriya tried again, using a fingertip to launch the ball a long distance, then turned and smiled, demonstrating he could still move. Aizawa gave a faint, impressed smile. Itadori cheered for Midoriya, bringing a smile to the green-haired student's face. From the sidelines, the same blonde-haired student sprinted toward Midoriya in anger. Aizawa reacted quickly, using his capture gear to restrain him and activating his quirk to neutralize the blonde student's power. Aizawa warned that he did not want to keep using his quirk repeatedly or his eyes would become dry, and the class watched with awe at how effectively he disabled the blonde student's ability. Aizawa reminded everyone they had more to do and led the class on. They completed a few more exercises before the first class ended and the students filed through the entrance. Itadori noticed Midoriya's finger wrapped in bandages and asked about it. Midoriya said that a student from recovery had healed him. Uraraka and Tenya caught up with them and joined the conversation briefly before they all went their separate ways. On his way back to his apartment, Itadori was approached by Ishido, who ran up to him, out of breath, and reminded him to wait. Itadori apologized, explaining he had been distracted by everything that had happened that day, which put Ishido at ease. Ishido said the day had gone well and expressed excitement about the possibility of learning interesting things in class. They walked together to an intersection, exchanged goodbyes, and parted ways. With free time, Itadori went to an abandoned playground to practice blood manipulation and to think about ways to make his jujitsu more effective. He recalled that he already knew convergence in a rough form and that piercing blood was somewhat doable but needed more practice. He remembered bits of training and tips he had received. Flashback. Noritoshi had explained that the strength of blood manipulation lay in its versatility and advised that Itadori focus on fundamentals first, since there was not enough time to turn the technique into a weapon. Noritoshi emphasized the importance of learning how to heal and bind minor injuries safely. Itadori had been eager to learn flashy moves if time permitted. Choso, pouting in the background, had expressed a desire to help his little brother learn. Choso had said that flowing red scales would make Itadori unstoppable and that supernova would be useful in close combat against Sukuna, but Noritoshi had insisted those techniques were too advanced for someone who had only recently acquired the ability. Back in the present, Itadori sat on a swing and considered trying something new. He recalled Choso's comment about controlling the blood within him to increase his strength. He stood, visualized his blood vessels, and attempted to accelerate his blood flow as practice. He did not yet have the right balance or control, and pain struck him sharply. Itadori cried out and collapsed, overwhelmed by the discomfort. A short time later, he regained his composure and prepared to continue training more cautiously. Itadori watched the sunset and thought that Choso made it look so easy, feeling the wind grow cold around him. He decided to go back and prepare dinner. He returned to his apartment and spent the evening watching the news while channeling a steady stream of cursed energy into his tool. A creeping sense of dread made him feel like he was forgetting something, and then he realized he had fallen behind on the rent and panicked at the shortage of money. He told himself that tomorrow would be a rough day and collapsed onto the bed. Itadori woke early the next morning and ran through his schedule. He planned to go to UA Academy first, then practice blood manipulation until evening, visit the underground arena to try to earn cash for the rent, return home, and finish his homework. He made breakfast, watched a little more news, put on his uniform, and glanced at the framed photos of his friends. He promised himself he would do his best and left for school. On the way to UA Academy, he noticed a commotion in the street. A man had been hurled into a wall with enough force to crack the plaster. The man lay on the ground, dazed. Itadori stepped forward and demanded to know what was happening, drawing the attention of 3 thugs. One thug warned Itadori that it was none of his business and told him to leave before they changed their minds and beat him up. Another thug brought up a recent incident in which the man had beaten a speedster in an alleyway, saying the speedster had been traumatized and kept talking about the kid with scars on his face, which put the others on edge. The third thug declared that someone like that could not be allowed to run around freely and made a move to engage, prompting both companions to take positions. Itadori stated that he could not let them continue. Everyone's attention shifted when Aizawa appeared, his tired eyes marked by heavy bags. Aizawa said he had hoped for a peaceful morning commute but acknowledged that there were always people causing a ruckus these days. Itadori returned his usual smile. Itadori called out to Teacher Aizawa as the other sighed and walked toward him. Teacher Aizawa told Itadori that he would handle the thugs and that Itadori should get to school, which made Itadori pout. Itadori offered to help and argued that working together would be faster, but Teacher Aizawa declined and reminded him that it was his job. Suddenly 3 thugs rushed them. Itadori and Aizawa dodged the incoming attacks in a fluid, practiced motion. Itadori launched a barrage of punches at one thug, which the thug managed to block. The thug noted internally that Itadori's strength felt like being hit with a metal bat. He drew a katana and tried to counter with a slice aimed toward Itadori's neck, but his arm was grabbed and he was slammed into a wall. Staggering, the thug swung a large horizontal slash that Itadori countered with a manji kick. The kick stunned the thug, and Itadori followed by tossing him to the ground until he was out of the fight. Itadori started to move toward Aizawa, but then a gunshot rang out. Itadori saw Teacher Aizawa with one arm bleeding. One thug was holding a gun while another had suddenly taken on reptilian features, scales spreading across his skin and a tail emerging. The gunman explained with a grin that he had taken advantage of their distraction and aimed to kill them, though his shot had missed. Aizawa charged in and activated his quirk while attempting to use his capture gear to restrain the reptilian thug. The reptilian thug taunted that Aizawa's trick would not work on him, but Aizawa closed the distance and began to pummel him. The reptilian thug landed a punch to Aizawa's stomach that sent him skidding back a few meters. The gunman reminded them that he had not been forgotten and raised his weapon to fire again. Before he could pull the trigger, Itadori knocked the gun upward, making the shot miss, then delivered an uppercut and slammed the gunman to the ground, taking him out of the fight. Teacher Aizawa warned that he would not be able to use his quirk for long and that the reptilian thug's scales made him particularly durable, so they needed to end the fight quickly. Itadori nodded and joined him. Teacher Aizawa observed that Itadori was experienced in hand-to-hand combat and that he could hold his own. Itadori squared into a focused stance, and the two charged the last thug together. The reptilian fighter dodged and parried both of them, showing more skill than his companions. He created distance and threw concealed knives at Itadori. They arrived faster than Itadori expected, tearing his uniform before he could react, but he reinforced his body with cursed energy so the remaining knives glanced off. Aizawa caught up and traded blows with the final thug while Itadori leapt through the air to strike. The reptilian thug stepped back and transformed further into his lizard-like form, causing Itadori's landing to crack the ground. Teacher Aizawa warned himself that forcing his quirk further would soon make him unable to see clearly, but Itadori surged forward and began an intense exchange of blows with the transformed thug. The thug taunted, but he started to weaken under Itadori's relentless strikes. Itadori thought that even if the thug's skin was extremely durable, he could still reach him in other ways. When the thug questioned how Itadori could hurt him without leaving scratches, Itadori seized his wrist and squeezed, forcing the thug to wince. Furious, the thug shouted, but Itadori moved behind him before he could react and landed a cursed energy-infused punch to his back that left the thug winded and collapsing to his knees. Aizawa was then able to secure the weakened thug with his capture gear. Teacher Aizawa praised Itadori for his work, and Itadori smiled in response. Itadori reminded Aizawa that he had said he did not need help, and Aizawa sighed and offered a small smile. Itadori suggested they go to UA High so the doctor could patch him up. Aizawa said he needed to wait for the police to arrive to take the suspects into custody before he would head to school. Aizawa warned Itadori that if he did not see him in the classroom before Aizawa arrived, he would assign twice as much homework. Itadori quivered and then ran off toward school. Teacher Aizawa watched Itadori disappear into the distance and reflected that the young man fought like someone with prior experience in encounters like this, but he had nothing concrete on him. Sooner or later, Itadori would reveal something about himself. Aizawa inspected the man who had been the target of the thugs as the police and ambulance arrived. Itadori arrived at the classroom panting as he opened the door. He thought that at least he would not have to worry about Aizawa giving him more work. The other students saw his torn uniform. Classmate Mina Ashido noticed his condition and asked what had happened, pointing out that his clothes were a mess. Itadori checked himself and found multiple slashes through his uniform. He smiled and said that he had seen a cat and tried to pet it, but the cat did not like him and had torn up his clothes, which eased suspicion. Ashido warned him to be careful with stray animals because they could be dangerous. Another student asked whether anyone had seen Teacher Aizawa. Kaminari remarked that Itadori was a little behind schedule while Itadori tried to make up an excuse, and Aizawa appeared behind him, startling the peach-haired boy. Aizawa explained in his monotone voice that Itadori had been sleeping more than usual. Aizawa then said they should start the lesson so they would not waste time, and everyone took their seats. Class resumed, and before long the bell rang for lunchtime. They all went to the cafeteria, selected their usual meals, and sat down to chat. Ashido teased that Itadori should get a new uniform so he would not look like a hobo again, and Midoriya laughed at the remark. Itadori protested that it had not been his fault that his clothes had been ruined. Midoriya asked Ashido how she had met Itadori. Ashido replied that she had accidentally bumped into him once when his clothes were torn and that the rest had followed naturally. Ashido then remarked that she had never learned why he had been in that state, and Itadori grew nervous and started to stammer as the bell rang to signal the end of lunch. Itadori breathed a sigh of relief and thought he had escaped for the moment as they returned to class. Once everyone was seated, the legendary number 1 hero All Might entered the room with a wide grin and announced his arrival enthusiastically. He introduced himself as the teacher for the day and explained that he would teach the basics of being a hero to give them a better understanding. All Might then announced that the lesson would be combat training. All Might pointed toward a section of the wall, which opened to reveal numbered boxes. He explained that the hero suits were designed to match each student's unique quirks and that petitions from those who had sent costumes ahead of time were included. After the students changed into their suits, All Might instructed them to proceed to the test zone. When they entered the zone, Itadori observed the variety of costumes. Some outfits were more revealing than he had expected, and that made him a little uncomfortable. Ashido approached him and explained that her costume was designed to suit the needs of her quirk, and she grew slightly embarrassed when Itadori reacted. She complimented Itadori on his gauntlets. His costume combined his repaired jujitsu tech uniform with a pair of gauntlets, one of which was a replica and no longer a cursed tool. Itadori replied that the clothes meant a great deal to him and that he thought of the people he cared about every time he used them, giving a genuine smile that Ashido returned. Midoriya complimented Itadori's costume, and Itadori returned the compliment to Midoriya while trying not to laugh at some of the more unusual design choices. They walked toward All Might, who was waiting up front. All Might divided the class into 2 groups for the exercise, heroes and villains, with teams of 2. He described the scenario. The hero team must secure a mock bomb while the villain team would defend and hide it before time ran out. Team assignments put Midoriya and Uraraka on the hero side against Bakugo and Tenya as the villains. Itadori asked Midoriya to point out which student was Bakugo, and Midoriya indicated the blonde boy across the zone. Bakugo glared sharply in their direction and shouted in anger, but All Might stepped in and calmed him down. All Might then told the rest of the class that they would observe the exercise from the observation room. While they moved to the observation room, the others asked Itadori whether he thought Midoriya and Uraraka could win. Itadori considered their quirks and explained that, even though Midoriya's power was tremendous and tended to injure him when used recklessly, if they were smart and coordinated they had a good chance. He suggested possible strategies, splitting up, forcing a 1-on-2, Midoriya seeking an opening against Bakugo while Uraraka used her mobility to disrupt Tenya. Kaminari and Kirishima praised Itadori's insight, and Ashido teased that she had expected him to forget details, which Itadori denied. All Might acknowledged Itadori's observation and praised him for the strategic thinking. Soon after, the exercise began. Bakugo launched a sudden, aggressive attack, aiming to take Midoriya and Uraraka by surprise. Midoriya reacted quickly in a fluid, anime-style maneuver. He closed the distance, used momentum to flip Bakugo, and executed a controlled takedown that left Bakugo momentarily outmaneuvered but unharmed. The class cheered as the match continued. Midoriya and Uraraka split up to cover more ground. Midoriya led Bakugo into a maze-like section of the training area and managed to shake him, creating separation. Meanwhile, Uraraka attempted to secure the mock bomb by using her mobility to reach it, but Tenya moved it with him, causing Uraraka to collide with a wall in a dramatic but non-graphic impact. Tenya then taunted her in character, showing that he was taking the villain role seriously. The observation continued with everyone invested in how the teams would adapt and respond. The ground shook. When the view returned to Midoriya, the wall had been destroyed and Bakugo launched into a monologue, insisting that Midoriya's quirk would never let him win. Midoriya told himself not to give up, and Kirishima urged All Might to stop the fight before someone got seriously hurt. All Might, speaking into the microphone, warned Bakugo that destroying the fortress he was supposed to defend was unacceptable and that the team would lose many points if he continued. Midoriya and Bakugo fought on. Bakugo held the advantage until Midoriya created some distance between them. After briefly discussing their motivations and resolve, they charged at each other with victory as their only priority. Itadori observed that things were getting out of hand just before Midoriya blocked Bakugo's explosion and punched upward, which demolished the upper levels of the building. A scream followed a few seconds later. Tenya alerted everyone to the bomb, and All Might declared the heroes the winners, surprising everyone, including Itadori. Itadori urged All Might to call the medical staff because Midoriya looked like he would need help, and the transmission showed Midoriya collapse. When the battle ended, All Might announced that Team C would be the heroes and Team B the villains. Ashido asked whether that meant Itadori and Yaoyorozu would face Todoroki and Shoji. Itadori quietly described Todoroki as the ice user and Shoji as the one with multiple limbs. Yaoyorozu told them to take their positions, and Itadori followed her toward the building, hoping he would not have to use his techniques. Outside the building, Itadori and Yaoyorozu discussed their plan while Todoroki and Shoji entered. Yaoyorozu observed that Todoroki created ice wherever he touched and Shoji could manifest extra limbs, so they should team up on one opponent before going for the bomb. Itadori wondered whether their opponents might already be in the room with the bomb. Yaoyorozu said she had an idea. All Might signaled the start of the round, and the two were startled when ice began to cover the building and the entrance became blocked. Itadori worried that the opponents were stalling to run out the clock, and Yaoyorozu pointed out that the windows were still open. Itadori offered to jump up and carry Yaoyorozu through a window. Yaoyorozu hesitated at the danger, so Itadori removed his jacket and handed it to her as protection from broken glass, assuring her that he was more resilient than she might expect. She blushed slightly, accepted the jacket, and climbed onto his back. He took a running start and leapt for the window, but overshot the jump, shattering the glass and landing on the third floor. Kaminari, watching from the observation room, reacted in disbelief, while All Might praised the unexpected entry for its surprise factor. Many classmates saw Itadori's superhuman strength for the first time and were shocked. Shoji noted that the sound indicated the intruders had entered, and Todoroki sealed the room's entrance with a thick ice wall, saying they would not make it in time. After recovering, Itadori and Yaoyorozu searched room to room on the third floor. Itadori tried to be stealthy by rolling around and checking corners while Yaoyorozu created a metallic staff and moved more conventionally. Then she giggled at Itadori's antics. They soon found a door studded with ice spikes and realized this must be where the bomb was hidden. Yaoyorozu stopped Itadori from breaking it and produced a smoke bomb, explaining that they only needed to touch the bomb to win and that a smokescreen would let them rush in. Itadori nodded, cleared the spiked ice from the door, and prepared a cursed energy-infused strike. Shoji and Todoroki watched the door with anticipation. The door suddenly flew off its hinges and barreled toward them. Both barely dodged and dropped to the floor to evade it. Yaoyorozu threw the smoke bomb, and the room filled with thick smoke. Itadori and Yaoyorozu split up and ran for the bomb. Shoji struggled to see through the haze, while Todoroki touched the ground with both arms and formed ice that covered Itadori's and Yaoyorozu's legs. Both were shocked and began to smash the ice to free themselves. Shoji had created extra sensory organs and picked up the sound of ice breaking. He ran toward Yaoyorozu and attempted to pin her down, but she struck his face with her staff, freed herself, and tried to escape. Caught in the confusion, the two continued to press forward toward the bomb. Yaoyorozu thought she could do this, but the smoke began to dissipate and Shoji caught her once more. Itadori saw Yaoyorozu captured and Yaoyorozu urged him not to worry and to get the bomb. Itadori sprinted, but a wall of icy spikes suddenly blocked his path. Todoroki announced that it would not be that easy and launched ice walls. Itadori backflipped to avoid them. As Todoroki's attacks slowed, Itadori rushed forward with a punch to the chest. Todoroki countered, grabbed his arm, and in an instant Itadori was enveloped in ice. In the observation room everyone was on edge. Ashido called for Itadori. Kaminari and Kirishima were sweating slightly, worried for their friend. Ida muttered that Todoroki was monstrous when Todoroki walked toward Shoji and Yaoyorozu while Itadori remained frozen. Before All Might could declare victory, Itadori broke free from the ice. Todoroki thought it usually took much longer to break free, but Itadori smashed a nearby pillar, creating smoke, crouched and touched the floor, and the ground shifted in a way that made Todoroki lose his balance. Itadori thought this was his best opening but that he could not reveal his full technique yet as he watched Todoroki stumble. Todoroki cursed inwardly about losing his footing as Itadori readied himself. Itadori moved behind Todoroki with blinding speed, grabbed him, and executed a powerful suplex that left Todoroki unconscious. Shoji admired the display and said he had to reach the bomb before Itadori did. He threw Yaoyorozu farther away and charged at Itadori. Itadori said he did not have time to fight, grabbed a barrel and threw it at Shoji, who caught it. Before Shoji could return it, someone struck Shoji from behind with a staff. Yaoyorozu urged Itadori to go. He ran and touched the bomb, securing their victory. All Might declared the hero's win as Itadori collapsed onto his back. Yaoyorozu ran to him and asked if he was all right. She saw him smile. Itadori explained he was just catching his breath and Yaoyorozu smiled back. Yaoyorozu praised his efforts and they began to leave before Shoji interrupted, asking who would pick up the still unconscious Todoroki. Itadori admitted he might have gone a bit too rough, then carried Todoroki on his shoulder. He insisted it was only fair that he helped since he had been the one who knocked Todoroki out, and they exited the building. Itadori took Todoroki to be treated and drew a scolding from the recovery girl before rejoining the rest of the class in the observation room. Kirishima praised the suplex and called it impressive. Achiko complimented Itadori's quick thinking and the surprising evasions he had shown. Itadori credited Yaoyorozu's plan and said he could not have reached the bomb without her, which made Yaoyorozu smile. Bakugo watched in silence and wondered how he could possibly beat them. After his earlier fight with Midoriya he had already been shaken, and seeing Todoroki and Itadori's talent left him feeling weaker than ever. Before he could dwell on it, All Might announced the next team for training, and Itadori watched, surprised at everyone's abilities. Class ended and they returned to the classroom to resume their studies. Itadori thought about Midoriya and Todoroki and resolved to check on them after school, feeling a little remorseful about how he had defeated Todoroki. After the final class he saw Midoriya open the door and felt relieved and happy as he approached. Itadori asked Midoriya how he was feeling. Midoriya said he was alright but had hoped to be in the classroom with everyone. The classmates gathered and complimented Midoriya on his performance, but when Midoriya noticed Bakugo's seat was empty he ran off. Kaminari asked where Bakugo had gone. Itadori considered following but decided it was between them. He watched All Might try to comfort Bakugo, who shrugged him off and walked toward the exit. After class Itadori went to the infirmary, where Todoroki sat upright on a recovery bed and met his gaze. Todoroki coldly asked what Itadori was doing there and whether he had anything better to do. Itadori approached, apologized, and then said he hoped they could be friends. Todoroki's eyes widened. He asked why and whether Itadori really expected him to want friendship after what had happened. Itadori, regretful, said he was not forcing anything and reflected on how similar Todoroki reminded him of someone he cared about. He explained that he only wanted Todoroki to be happy and had never intended to make anyone feel inferior. He wanted people to have reasons to keep going even if others called him naive. Todoroki was surprised and struggled to find words. Realizing that someone besides his family seemed to care for him unsettled him. Itadori turned his back, told Todoroki the offer remained open, and left the infirmary, leaving Todoroki to reflect. After leaving school, Itadori went to the abandoned playground to practice more with his abilities, but he felt lonelier than usual. As the wind brushed past him, Itadori wondered why he had been transported to this world and wished he could see everyone one last time. Watching the sunset, he remembered the rent he had to pay and accepted that he could not change his circumstances now. He resolved that he could not falter even if he had not chosen this life. Thoughts of the people from his old world and those he had met here, Ishido, Midoriya, Kaminari, Kirishima, and the rest of his classmates fueled his determination as he set off toward the underground arena with his mask. He told himself he must keep going. On his way, Itadori realized he was still wearing his school uniform and decided to change to avoid unwanted attention. Before he reached home, he noticed a familiar blonde girl accompanied by a man with stitched skin and black hair. Quickly slipping behind a street corner, he listened to their conversation. The pair spoke about an underground fighter who had earned the nickname Demon of Mizudafu for his fearsome reputation. Itadori found the nickname as silly as any other moniker and worried that they might be looking for him. He hesitated because he needed money to cover his expenses and feared losing his apartment, but he finally convinced himself he could run off after cashing in any winnings. He changed, grabbed his phone, noticed a message from Ishido, and decided to check it later before heading back out to the arena. At the arena, Itadori followed his usual routine, defeating every challenger. As his name spread, stronger opponents sought him out, but he kept pace through steady reinforcement of his body. After an hour of non-stop fighting, he collected his earnings and slipped out into the night, hoping the people who might be searching for him would not notice. They were waiting for him on the street. The blonde woman expressed admiration for his moves in the ring, while the stitched man approached more directly, explaining that their boss wanted to hire the best fighters and had sent them to recruit him. Itadori declined and tried to walk past them. The stitched man then hurled a fireball as a loud demonstration to get his attention. Itadori braced and deflected the attack with his arms. The man explained that the display was meant to get his attention and reiterated the offer, promising generous pay. When Itadori refused, the man let his hand flare with fire as a warning and made it plain that they would use force if necessary. Startled, Itadori bolted and vanished in a blur, leaving the blonde to laugh as the other scowled. The next day, Itadori arrived at UA to find reporters gathered at the front of the school. They swarmed him and asked about having All Might as a teacher and whether the hero lived up to his reputation. Itadori answered that All Might was impressive and taught well, and he asked the reporters to respect personal space. Before the crowd could press further, Aizawa appeared and pulled Itadori out of the throng using his capture gear, leading him inside as the heavy school gates closed behind them. Inside the classroom, Itadori took his seat and relaxed while classmates chatted. When Aizawa entered, his presence quieted the room. He reprimanded Bakugo for his reckless behavior during the combat training and then turned his attention to Midoriya, noting that Midoriya had broken his arm again. Aizawa sighed and warned that sooner or later it would become a detriment for everyone Midoriya tried to protect. His tone saddened Midoriya. Aizawa then began to announce that since everything was settled they would. The classroom grew tense, and everyone wondered if it would be another special test. Aizawa finished by saying they would be choosing the class president, and the students breathed a collective sigh of relief. Kirishima immediately volunteered himself, and the room erupted into chaos as many students pushed their candidacies. Ida called for silence and explained that being class president required responsibility and the confidence of the whole class, so they should hold a democratic vote. Kirishima asked whether people would just vote for themselves, and Ida answered that voting for oneself rarely worked. People needed to vote for others to elect someone. The class agreed. After the ballots were compiled, the votes were recorded. Itadori with 4 votes, Izuku Midoriya with 3, and Momo Yaoyorozu with 2. Itadori was baffled to learn he had more votes than Yaoyorozu. He protested that he had voted for Ida because that made more sense, and Ida smiled. Bakugo demanded to know why Midoriya had 3 votes. One classmate muttered that Midoriya might be a better choice than Bakugo. Ashido praised Bakugo for his performance in combat training, while Kirishima and Kaminari shook their heads. Uraraka explained that she had voted for Midoriya because she trusted him, which drew affectionate murmurs from several classmates. Ashido blushed and protested at the attention, and Itadori looked away, slightly embarrassed. Aizawa declared that Itadori would be class president and Midoriya would be vice president, and the class murmured its approval. A student with frog-like characteristics remarked that Itadori was not a bad choice, and Kaminari noted Midoriya's solid performance against Bakugo during training. When class ended, everyone headed to the cafeteria. Itadori felt a little overwhelmed by the crowd, but he took a rice bowl and sat at an empty table. Midoriya, Ashido, Uraraka, and Ida joined him. Midoriya confessed doubts about serving as vice president and suggested Yaoyorozu would be better suited, but the others reassured him that he would do fine. Uraraka promised to do her best to help him. Itadori said that Midoriya's courage and judgment made him someone worth following, and Ida added that those qualities were why he had voted for Midoriya, surprising both Midoriya and Uraraka. Itadori teased Ida about sounding formal, and Ida sighed, explaining that his family had worked as heroes for generations and mentioning Ingenium. Midoriya brightened and explained who Ingenium was, and Ida revealed that Ingenium was his brother and that he aspired to be like him one day. The others thought that was a noble ambition. An alarm then sounded, and an intercom announced a level 3 security breach and ordered everyone to evacuate outside. Students panicked and rushed toward the exits. A nearby student told Itadori that a level 3 breach meant someone had entered UA without permission and that none of them had seen one in 3 years. The group agreed they should leave, and Ashido urged them to move as the crowd surged. The mass of students became overwhelming. Midoriya began to be swept along, and Itadori called out for him. Ida grabbed Midoriya as reporters gathered near the entrance, forcing Aizawa and Principal Mike to hold them back. Ida tried to speak but was pressed toward a window by the crowd. Itadori decided they needed to calm everyone. He told Ida to get Uraraka to use her quirk to raise him up. Itadori hefted Ida and launched him toward Uraraka. Ida called for Uraraka to grab his hand. She did, and Ida floated. Ida activated his own quirk to propel himself but began tumbling uncontrollably. He collided with the wall in a comical, anime-style mishap, scrambled up to a higher vantage point, and called out that there was no real danger, that it was only the media. Ida's announcement calmed the crowd, and students relaxed and began to disperse. Itadori watched Ida dust himself off and return to the group. With order restored, the students returned to class for Aizawa's next announcement. Aizawa said they would have an off-campus trip focused on rescue training, that they could choose to wear their costumes, and that they would travel by bus. He dismissed them to prepare. Ida organized the students into an orderly line as they boarded, but the bus was not what he had pictured, and everyone laughed at the mismatch. When they arrived, Aizawa announced they were there. The students disembarked and saw the building before them. Itadori guessed that USJ meant Universal Studios, but a person in a puffy space costume explained that it stood for Unforeseen Simulation Joint and admitted the confusion was understandable. Itadori remarked that the costume looked like a giant marshmallow, and Midoriya asked if he knew Space Hero 13. Itadori affirmed that he did. Uraraka exclaimed that they had saved many people from disasters. 13 then instructed everyone to follow her inside the facility and explained the reason for creating the place and her desire to teach people how to save others. 13 explained that everyone probably knew her quirk, black hole, and that she used it to save people. She warned that the power could also easily kill someone, and the group reacted with shock. Aizawa leaned on a pillar and considered the warning. When he looked closer, he noticed Itadori clenching his fist and looking saddened, which sparked his interest. Aizawa reflected that Itadori not only had combat experience beyond his years and surprising strength for someone with no quirk, but had also seen loss. He vowed as a teacher to uncover what Itadori was suppressing and try to help him with his own experience, even if he had not been with him long. 13 reminded them that here they would learn how to save people with their quirks and that when they left she wanted them to know they had the power to help others. The presentation ended and everyone cheered. Suddenly the lights began to flicker throughout the USA. A dark portal opened in the center of the complex, and after a few seconds figures began to step through, most notably a man covered in hands and a giant creature beside him. Aizawa ordered 13 to protect the students and put on his goggles. Kirishima asked what was happening as Itadori recognized the portal and felt it looked like the same one that had brought him into this world. He started to move toward it. Aizawa warned Itadori to stop and insisted that he stay back, explaining that this threat was not like the thugs they had faced and that all of the newcomers had quirks. Itadori flinched but nodded, conflicted about remaining passive when people were in danger. He insisted that he could not stand back and do nothing and that he had to help even if they were stronger than him. Aizawa sighed, put on his goggles, and leaped toward the bottom of the stairs where a large group of villains awaited. A villain nearby questioned whether Aizawa had come alone and whether he was confident enough to face them by himself. The hand-covered villain warned the others not to underestimate him but ordered an attack. As 3 of them charged, Aizawa dodged and countered, neutralized the quirk of one attacker, and used his capture gear to restrain another before throwing him into a third. He commented that they relied too much on their quirks and then moved through the group, defeating one after another. Itadori watched with some relief that his teacher had been able to handle a group, but he knew Aizawa could only delay them and would tire eventually. 13 urged everyone to evacuate while Aizawa held the villains back, and the students began to run toward the entrance. The same black fog that had brought the villains soon materialized and blocked their path. The mist shifted into a humanoid shape with 2 glowing eyes and declared that it had invited itself in. The being identified itself as the League of Villains and claimed it had come for all might. Kirishima and Bakugo rushed forward and attacked the figure, producing an explosive burst and a cloud of smoke, but the villain appeared unharmed. The attacker noted that the strike, while powerful, was insufficient against him and then surrounded the area with his fog. The villain announced that his intent was to scatter them and inflict suffering, and the fog formed a dome that enveloped the students and separated them into different sections of the USJ complex. Itadori reacted quickly enough to get out of the dome's immediate range along with Ida, Uraraka, Ashido, Shoji, and a few others, but he watched in horror as the dome closed and the rest were taken. Itadori shouted that he would try to get them out and began punching the dome relentlessly. After a few seconds, the dome vanished and the students who had been inside were gone. The portal villain reappeared and taunted that he had left a few out on purpose and that he would have to deal with the remaining group personally. Enraged, Itadori dashed at the villain and attempted to land a punch. The attack only warped the purple fog surrounding the villain. The villain taunted that Itadori had learned that he could not harm him and then launched tentacle-like tendrils made from the fog to grab him. Itadori maneuvered through the barrage of attacks and found a way out, retreating back to his classmates. Itadori told the others that when he punched the fog he had seen a strange metal box at its center. 13 took note of the information and scolded him for being reckless, warning that he could have been caught by the villain. Ashido echoed that sentiment, and Itadori apologized. Itadori warned that they could not escape with everyone who had just disappeared and that they had to find them. The group agreed. At the very back, Shoji scanned the surroundings with multiple eyes and ears before approaching the others and reporting that people were scattered but still inside the building. Relief spread through the group as 13 moved toward Itadori. 13 urged Itadori, as class president, to try to leave the area and contact the people outside, cautioning him about the opponent in front of them. Itadori doubted he could get past the enemy, reasoning that even if he reached the opponent, the villain could simply create portals to block his way. He glanced at his classmates, considered the possibilities, and then fixed his gaze on Ida. Itadori proposed making a distraction so that Ida could sprint past the enemy. Ida nodded nervously and took a running stance. The portal wielder mocked the plan and launched an attack. 13 attempted to absorb the strike with their quirk, but the enemy created a portal and redirected the assault. The redirected blow tore through 13's protective suit from behind and knocked them to the floor. The group watched in shocked silence as 13 lay collapsed. Itadori hoped that 13 and Bakugo would recover. He checked his own body and remembered that he had lost an arm during the battle with the Nomu. Panic rose briefly, but he quickly relied on his RCT to regenerate the limb and mend his other injuries. A faint white glow spread through him as he focused on restoring nerves, tissue, and broken bones. Knowing that RCT would not fix closed wounds if left to heal naturally, he pushed himself to regrow the arm. The limb returned, and the bandages fell away. Relieved, he also realized the process had drained a great deal of his energy, leaving him tired and strained. Itadori rose from the hospital bed, detached himself from the medical equipment, and searched for his belongings with a sinking feeling that something might have been destroyed. He found his phone on the nightstand and felt a small surge of relief at the sight of it. He opened the messages and read Ishido's text asking if they could hang out like they used to before UA, simply to spend some time together. He drafted a brief reply apologizing for the late answer and agreeing to meet, then the phone began to ring. He fumbled to grab it and turned it down when he saw that Ishido was calling. Ishido burst into surprise upon learning he was awake. She told him that the doctors had predicted a week of recovery and had feared he might be in a coma. Itadori explained that he recovered faster than most. Ishido recounted what happened while he had been unconscious. After the events at the USJ, he had been brought to the hospital, and the doctors had described the severity of his fractures and the internal injuries he had suffered. She said the medical staff had warned that those injuries might prevent him from becoming a hero and had mentioned that he had no family, her voice carrying sadness. Itadori reassured her that he could take care of himself. Ishido interrupted him, saying that UA had covered the costs and given them a day off, so he did not need to worry about tomorrow. She added that Midoriya had told everyone about the unusual things he had done while fighting that thing, so he would have a lot to explain. Itadori agreed cheerfully, but his face showed nervousness as he thought about how he would explain jujitsu and how inadequate his explanations might be. Ishido then shifted to a more serious tone. She told him she had been worried sick and had never seen anyone's life hanging by a thread. She mentioned the serious injuries he had suffered and how close to death he had been. Tears began in her voice, and Itadori heard soft crying through the phone, which made him feel even more guilty. Itadori knew the pain she was feeling seeing someone at the brink of death and not knowing if they would live. For him, death had already been something he had faced many times, but he could never get used to it. He had believed he could throw his life away for others since he thought no one would mourn him, but Ishido's reaction showed him he had been wrong. Ishido told him she had been terrified he would die and, holding back tears, asked if he could promise that, if he continued being a hero, he would not throw his life away for them. Itadori said he could not guarantee that but that he would try his best. He spoke with unexpected seriousness and renewed resolve, surprising Ishido for a moment. She agreed and said she should let him rest. She said they would talk more when she visited the next day, and they exchanged goodbyes before hanging up. Itadori stared at his phone blankly for a while, thinking how selfish he had been so focused on protecting others that he had forgotten someone cared about him. He returned to his room, placed his phone on the nightstand, and lay face first on the hospital bed as the storm of emotions from the call came down on him. After several minutes he finally fell asleep. The next day, sunlight lit the curtains in his stale hospital room and made Itadori squint before finally waking. He felt restless from the previous day but reassured himself when he saw his backpack beside the nightstand and his phone showing 9 a.m. He decided to stroll around the hospital and maybe find a vending machine, then called Midoriya for a calm chat. Midoriya answered with concern and asked if Itadori was all right. Itadori smiled and told him that he was better. Midoriya explained that he had been checking up on his friend, and Itadori responded cheerfully that he was doing great, aside from a few scratches, while noting that others had more serious injuries, including Kaken. Midoriya's mood dropped at the mention of his blonde friend, and Itadori tried to reassure him, saying that everyone had made it back and there was no use worrying. Midoriya pointed out that Itadori had gone straight to the hospital, and Itadori laughed nervously and insisted he was fine. Itadori then invited Midoriya to hang out with him and Ashido once he was discharged. Midoriya accepted without hesitation and asked if they had a place in mind. Itadori admitted he did not know yet, and Midoriya said they would figure it out later before mentioning he had to have breakfast with his mother and would see him tomorrow. A nurse came in a few minutes after the call and was surprised to find Itadori without medical equipment and to see that the arm that had been missing had somehow returned overnight and his injuries had healed. The nurse assumed his quirk had been responsible, and Itadori confirmed that was the case. After a quick round of diagnostics that found him perfectly healthy, the nurse said she would register his condition, give him new clothes, and discharge him shortly. The door opened again to reveal Aizawa in his hero uniform and wrapped in bandages. Aizawa noted that Itadori appeared better and reminded him that the last time he had seen him he had been missing an arm. He expressed irritation and concern that Itadori's actions had been reckless, saying that fainting in front of everyone and confronting the creature head-on had put him at risk and could have led to death. Itadori met Aizawa's gaze with a hard expression and explained that he had judged the risk worth taking. Even if he had died, he believed delaying the threat would have bought enough time for All Might to arrive and protected the classroom. Aizawa winced at the shift in tone but, after a moment of reluctant consideration, decided to let the matter go just this once. The door opened again and Midnight entered with an eye-catching, distinctive outfit, followed by a tall blonde man with speakers around his neck. Midnight complimented Itadori and called him adorable, and the blonde man, Present Mike, praised Itadori loudly for holding off the creature for a long stretch. Itadori nervously scratched the back of his head when presented with the praise and asked if the blonde man had been the one who gave instructions during the entrance exam. Present Mike responded enthusiastically that he liked the kid already. Aizawa introduced them as colleagues and potential teachers. Present Mike announced his hero name and struck an exaggerated pose, while Midnight was about to give more information about her own alias before Aizawa interrupted and told Itadori simply to call her Midnight. Midnight pouted but stepped closer anyway. Present Mike and Midnight explained that they had come to check up on Itadori and to ask a few questions. Midnight began to ask about the villain and what he had said, and Itadori exhaled internally at the prospect of explaining his abilities but then answered. He reported that he did not have much information. The creature had displayed shock-absorbing properties and later appeared to regenerate, and he had been too far away to hear what the villain had said. Midnight acknowledged the information with a nod, and Present Mike remarked that he had expected little more. Midnight considered the report thoughtfully before moving on. Itadori concluded that this was everything he could offer. The blonde-haired hero wrapped his arm around Aizawa and offered his signature monotone stare, expressing that they could not thank Itadori enough for risking his life for his classmates and for Aizawa. Aizawa declared that, since Itadori was fully healed, he would attend class the next day. Present Mike objected, arguing that Itadori deserved time off, and Midnight agreed that the boy had been through a lot and should be allowed to rest. Itadori stood and smiled, insisting that he did not want to miss class and that he would be better able to meet everyone there. Present Mike remarked on how the boy continued to surprise him. Aizawa confirmed that they would meet the next day, wished Itadori well, and everyone exchanged goodbyes before leaving the room. A nurse returned with some clothes and asked Itadori to come to the reception area for confirmation once he had changed. He obliged and, after half an hour, left the hospital holding a bag that contained his damaged uniform and a single gauntlet. Before he could begin his walk home, a familiar pink-haired girl approached in disbelief at how quickly he had been discharged. Ashido expressed surprise that he was already out, and Itadori answered with a smirk that he had healed. Ashido stammered over how his arm had been missing and then let the thought go. She asked how he could laugh after nearly dying, and Itadori replied that he had gotten used to it. She hurried to catch up, asking where they were going, and they walked and chatted as the day progressed. At UA, Aizawa and Principal Nizu sat in the office with tea, discussing the incident and Itadori. Nizu asked whether Itadori had provided any additional information about his experience. Aizawa said there had been none and, since Itadori had been fighting the creature, he believed the boy was not lying. Nizu explained that although the papers Itadori had submitted when joining UA appeared authentic, there had been no record of anyone like him a few months earlier, as if he had appeared out of nowhere. Aizawa asked if Itadori had been living off the grid. Nizu clarified that there was nothing on him, no birth certificate, no school records, and no information about parents, which left Aizawa bewildered and wondering who Itadori truly was. Outside, the weather shifted and rain began to fall. Itadori noticed and pulled the hood of his new jacket over his head while Ashido opened an umbrella she had brought. Ashido asked if something was wrong. Itadori said nothing and they continued walking together. They stopped at Itadori's house so he could drop off his belongings, take a little money, and grab a treat before heading to Izuku Midoriya's home. They waited until Izuku appeared at the door with his mother. Izuku's mother introduced herself as Inko and expressed how happy she was that Izuku had made friends, pinching his cheek to the amusement of Ashido and Itadori. Itadori explained that they had come to hang out and take their minds off the previous day's events. Inko asked whether everyone had been all right after hearing about villains, and Itadori replied that All Might had arrived in time and saved everyone, causing Ashido to glare at him. Ashido asked whether Itadori had helped fight as well. He admitted he had, though not to the same extent as All Might, and Izuku smiled. Inko asked them to make sure Izuku was back by sunset, and the three friends agreed before she waved them off. The afternoon was spent walking around town, buying small treats, and finding moments to laugh or be amazed, like watching a hero stop a villain or a disruptive bystander being escorted away by police. Ashido and Izuku remained curious about Itadori's rapid recovery and unusual abilities, which he tried to avoid discussing. Eventually Izuku, the more timid of the two, asked about the moment when the creature had pinned Teacher Aizawa and Itadori had unleashed a focused projection to stop it. Itadori decided he could not hide everything and explained part of it. He had discovered in recent months that he could manipulate his blood to a limited degree, mostly for minor healing, but when he saw Teacher Aizawa in danger he compressed that ability into a compact form and released it in a burst at the creature, driven by adrenaline. Ashido remarked that it was odd his quirk had appeared only recently since most people developed theirs earlier. Izuku expressed amazement at the creative use of the ability. Ashido then asked whether that could explain how his arm had regrown overnight, and Itadori acknowledged that it was possible, though he could not be certain. Midoriya remarked that Itadori's quirk could heal things at an accelerated rate, but he had never seen full regeneration like Itadori's, except in the creature they had fought. He murmured the last thought to himself, and their friends patted Itadori on the back, pulling him out of his analytical trance. Itadori admitted that even he did not fully understand how it worked as they walked along. After a few hours of a peaceful hangout, the day grew dark and they decided to call it a night. Itadori dropped his friends off at their homes, returned to his apartment, too tired to cook, showered, and collapsed onto his bed. The next day, Itadori made a quick bite to eat and realized his uniform was still in the UA locker rooms. He decided to sneak into the school to retrieve it. The morning air carried a few puddles and gusts of wind as he walked through the calm neighborhood and onto the main road. After a few minutes he reached the UA entrance and hurried toward the locker rooms, carefully navigating halls and stairs to avoid staff, though he had a few close calls with teachers beginning their lessons. A short, white animal wearing clothes appeared in the hall and startled Itadori. Nizu asked him if no one had told him not to show up at the school in civilian clothes. Itadori explained that he had left his uniform in the locker room after taking his class to the USJ. Nizu asked his name. Itadori replied that he was Itadori Yuji. Nizu smiled and said that he could go and not to delay, since classes were starting. Itadori noted to himself that he had not expected talking animals to be commonplace here and wondered how Panda would have reacted. After changing into his uniform, Itadori entered the classroom. Everyone looked at him in surprise and erupted with questions about how he was there. Itadori tried to explain nervously that he had healed, but nobody believed him. Kaminari pointed out that his arm, which had previously been gone, now appeared regenerated, and Itadori froze. Aizawa then appeared with bandages and told Itadori to go to his desk. He walked in front of the class and explained that the nurse had determined Itadori's recovery was due to a quirk and that, since Itadori had not had one when he first entered UA, he must have awakened it at the USJ. The class accepted their mentor's explanation. Itadori silently thanked Aizawa. Aizawa reminded the students that their fight against the villains was not over, prompting them to think about the ongoing threat. Itadori reflected that the villains were relentless, even if their costumes looked ridiculous, and that incidents could still knock people out. Aizawa announced that the UA festival was approaching. The class reacted enthusiastically. Kirishima expressed that it should be treated like a normal school activity, while Kaminari listened with skepticism. A classmate raised the concern of a possible villain attack. Aizawa answered that holding the event would demonstrate the strength of their crisis management and that security would be increased significantly compared to previous years. He explained that the UA Sports Festival had become one of the biggest national events, taking the place of the old Olympics after changes in population and scale. Itadori thought it was unfortunate to have lost the original event but understood the reasons. Yaoyorozu added that professional heroes would be watching for new talent, and Aizawa urged the students not to slack off in their preparations, reminding them that they had one chance a year for a total of 3 and to make them count. Homeroom was dismissed. After a few more classes, lunchtime arrived. Itadori received a lot of attention for his actions at the USJ, and he used the opportunity to get to know his classmates better, though he had trouble remembering all their names. Kirishima praised his bravery with a thumbs up. Tokoyami complimented his courage. Shiro admitted he had arrived too late to see what had happened. Yaoyorozu, curious about his quirk, asked what it was. Itadori smiled and said that his classmates would have to figure it out for themselves. Shiro guessed that it had something to do with regrowing limbs as Itadori walked away to eat in the cafeteria, suggesting that Itadori was keeping secrets as well. Todoroki listened from the shadows and thought that everyone had something to hide. Those scars were more than the result of a few run-ins with thugs. Midoriya and Ashido saw the exchange and felt puzzled, since to them it seemed like nothing more than a blood manipulation quirk. Midoriya asked Ashido if she had any guesses about why he was keeping it to himself. Ashido suggested that he might not be telling the whole story and then listed some odd behaviors she had noticed. He kept details about his family's secret, sometimes contradicted himself, and tended to distance himself whenever the topic of his parents came up. Midoriya, cheerful and kind-hearted, said they should give him space for now. He might open up in time, and it could be a sensitive subject they did not want to push. Achiko peeked from behind Ashido and asked what they were talking about. Midoriya hurriedly said it was nothing and that they were just excited for the sports festival, and the three of them began chatting. In the meantime, Itadori sat alone at a table in the cafeteria, content to take some time to think. He considered that if the event Aizawa had warned them about was really as significant as described, he would have to train more. Fighting the monster had been a wake-up call. He wanted to become stronger. Being a hero looked appealing to him, because being a jujitsu sorcerer felt more like a duty to exorcise, and saving people had felt optional, which he did not like. As he thought about how to improve while he ate, Aizawa appeared and sat at the other side of the table, snapping Itadori out of his reverie. Itadori asked Aizawa what he was doing there while Aizawa drank his coffee. Aizawa said that the coffee machine in the teacher's lounge had broken, so he had come to the cafeteria. Itadori accepted that explanation, though Aizawa had actually wanted to get to know the boy. He reflected on his own demeanor toward students. They often saw him as emotionless and uncaring, which he knew was not truly who he was. He had also learned a few concerning things about Itadori, a capable fighter who had seen far too much for someone his age, yet who could still smile even after being critically hurt days earlier. Aizawa worried that the boy might be hiding his pain. Aizawa told Itadori that he had wanted to chat a little. Itadori nodded enthusiastically as he ate. Aizawa asked why Itadori had joined UA and mentioned that a few days ago the boy had no quirk, so becoming a hero would be twice as hard as for others in his class. Aizawa also reminded him to chew his food before answering. After a few seconds of chewing, Itadori explained that he had seen an entrance exam online and initially had not cared until he learned about the benefits of studying there. When Aizawa asked what benefits, Itadori said the scholarship program had been the main draw, and that his family situation made that opportunity important. Aizawa inquired if Itadori's family was going through hard times, and Itadori reacted with a cough as he choked on his food. He clarified that his parents had left him in the apartment months ago for work abroad, had told him they supported whatever he decided, and had only left him a small amount of money. He had thought UA would be the best chance for further education. Aizawa reflected that the family was mysteriously absent from Itadori's life but noted there would not be time to discuss it further then. Aizawa asked if Itadori would consider having him visit on Saturday to talk more privately. Itadori hesitated for a moment and then asked why Aizawa cared so much. He insisted he was doing fine despite being hurt a few days prior. The cheerful mood faded from the peach-haired boy's expression, and Aizawa felt uneasy, recognizing that he had touched a sensitive subject. Aizawa explained that Itadori had been more than just beaten up. Because Itadori was his student, Aizawa felt responsible for protecting him and everyone else, and he had felt too weak to stop the thing that had caused the harm. He wanted to help Itadori with whatever he was going through. Itadori considered this for a full minute before agreeing to have Aizawa visit. He added that he would need to clean his place since it was somewhat dusty, and he offered a thumbs up to ease the tension. The bell rang, signaling the end of the PRD. They left the cafeteria, exchanged goodbyes, and went their separate ways for the day. Itadori worried that Aizawa had not entirely believed his explanation, which came as no surprise to someone as perceptive as Aizawa. The rest of the day passed normally, with classes that felt like a slog. When the school day ended, Itadori walked home with his new group of friends until they gradually split off and he was left alone on the walk back to his apartment. He resolved to clean the place before Saturday. At home, he changed into casual clothes and started tidying, putting his playful cloud replica into his room along with other small projects. After a few hours of cleaning, he decided to relax and watch television while wondering what Aizawa saw in him. Later, Itadori skimmed channels to pass the time. A news broadcast caught his attention. A villain attack was being reported. The on-screen reporter described characteristics of the individual and explained that the villain was causing havoc in the middle of the city. As the broadcast continued, a car arced through the air and struck a nearby building, prompting people on the scene to scramble for safety. Someone off-camera shouted urgently, looking for the villain's location, and a massive arm swept through the area, sending police officers scattering in a dramatic, stylized motion. The broadcast reported that the person causing the destruction appeared to be a pale man with light blue hair and ragged clothes. The reporter said that authorities were still trying to investigate the identity of the villain as the camera pulled back from where a car had been hurled and then cut to the full devastation. Cars lay flipped, buildings bore deep slashes, and the road was scarred with craters. A man stood atop a mountain of wreckage, and Itadori's face went pale at the sight. Itadori felt dread and denial as he rose from the sofa, recalling that he had seen this man exorcised and struggling to understand why he was here. The man issued a brief command, then turned and smiled into the camera as he named Itadori Yuji. Laughter filled the room when the figure propelled himself out of the television and threw Itadori into a violent, stylized tumble. The floor shattered like glass beneath them and they fell into a strange, bottomless void. The man declared that he was humanity's curse and that no matter where Itadori went, he would follow. They locked eyes, charged at each other, and prepared to strike. As they shouted each other's names, everything went black. Itadori woke up drenched in sweat on the sofa. He wondered if he had fallen asleep while watching TV. The dream had felt unnervingly vivid, and he decided he should sleep on the bed instead of the sofa. He took a moment to calm himself, turned off the television, went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and drank an entire bottle of water. After quenching his thirst, he checked his phone and realized it was already time to go to school. Even if it had been only a dream, he resolved to expect anything people from his world might appear here, and they might not be allies. He prepared for the day. The next morning, Itadori made coffee for his guest, the only drink he thought the visitor would appreciate. The visit left him with a lot to ponder, but he was not yet ready to open up. His past felt like something too fragile to share. He had found drive during his battle against the strongest opponent he could remember, but his failures still stung, and he suspected his chances of returning to his world were effectively gone, especially since the only person he had seen with that kind of power was a villain. He wondered why adults preferred such bitter drinks, set the kettle to heat, and laid out sugar on the coffee table. A knock at the door interrupted him. He took a deep breath and opened it to find Aizawa standing there in civilian clothes, which put him slightly at ease. Aizawa told him he had followed the directions but had not expected the place to be so close to Yuji Itadori, offering a nervous laugh, explained that after signing up for Yuji his parents' home had been convenient and invited Aizawa inside. He told Aizawa not to worry, to take off his shoes at the entrance, and that the sofa was free if he wanted to sit. While Itadori prepared the coffee, Aizawa glanced down the hallway at a series of picture frames and then into the living room before settling onto the sofa. The apartment felt oddly sparse to Aizawa, as if the family had not lived there long. Perhaps they were simply tidy people. Itadori returned with 2 steaming cups and set one in front of Aizawa before taking the other for himself. Aizawa observed that he had never taken Itadori to be a coffee drinker. Itadori said he did not want to be wasteful and that a friend had suggested he try it. He added a few sugar cubes and immediately recoiled at the heat, which amused Aizawa. Aizawa decided to start with lighter questions and save the heavier ones for later. Aizawa noticed a photograph and asked whether the black-haired boy in it was the friend Itadori had mentioned. Itadori confirmed that he was and, with a small smile, told Aizawa that they were similar. When Aizawa asked in what way, Itadori explained that the friend had always been grumpy and often killed the mood, though not out of malice. The friend looked at things realistically and tried to comfort Itadori in his own, blunt way. As he spoke, Itadori felt as if that friend were glaring at him from the photo. He admitted he missed him and the others. He had grown up in a secluded place where they had spent a lot of time together, but after his family moved, visits became impossible. He then asked how Aizawa had managed to visit him now. Itadori asked whether Aizawa was a hero. Aizawa explained that his schedule did not fit that description. He worked at night as an underground hero, keeping away from the public. Itadori nodded in understanding. Aizawa inquired about the place Itadori had lived before and its name. Itadori admitted that he had forgotten the name and that it had many local nicknames, which Aizawa made a mental note of. Aizawa resolved that he had to help Itadori and knew he would need to press some issues. Aizawa then brought up Itadori's late-emerging quirk, noting that it usually appeared in childhood and advising a second checkup with a quirk specialist to detail and register the ability. Itadori bluntly refused. Aizawa asked why and urged him to learn about the power he now had, suggesting it could help at the festival. Itadori said he had never wanted to use it and that it had come from a desperate moment. Aizawa warned that hiding a quirk from the government was illegal and insisted that registration would be best. Itadori asked if anyone besides Aizawa and the class knew. Aizawa began to interject that they could not possibly, then Itadori pleaded, and after a pause he relented and agreed to register. Aizawa cautioned that if Itadori ever revealed his quirk publicly, he would have to face the consequences. Itadori thanked his teacher and then changed the subject. Trying to lighten the mood, Itadori asked what Aizawa did as an underground hero. Aizawa described handling real threats in the shadows to keep the public from learning the uglier side of the villains they faced. Itadori remarked that his hometown had been mostly peaceful. When Aizawa pressed on what he meant by mostly, Itadori admitted there had sometimes been people trying to harm others but that their community had its own version of heroes. Aizawa asked whether those local heroes had ever helped Itadori, noting the scars on his face and asking if anything had happened to cause them. Itadori refused to discuss it, calling it personal and speaking with sorrow. Aizawa understood and offered quiet counsel, saying that painful things shouldn't always be left behind because they could teach lessons and help others. He remembered his own past and a light blue-haired friend from those days. Aizawa suggested that he thought Itadori might be going through something similar, though he could not be certain. He described seeing it in the way Itadori carried himself and how he tried to inspire others by staying strong. Aizawa advised that doing everything alone could only go so far and that Itadori needed to accept help when it was offered. Some people could only be saved if they wanted to be. He reassured Itadori that when he was ready to talk, there would be people who cared to listen no matter how strange it might sound. Itadori smiled warmly and promised that he would. Aizawa told Itadori he was too young to shoulder such worries and that he should leave them to the adults. He sipped his coffee, stood, and said he would leave the decision to Itadori. Checking his phone and placing the mug on the table, Aizawa said he was needed by colleagues and prepared to leave. He glanced back to bid Itadori a good day and headed for the door. As Aizawa walked out, he noticed Itadori's bedroom door slightly open and paused to look inside. He saw weapons hung on the wall, some crude, and a red and black 3-section staff on the bed. A whiteboard on the wall held a schedule that partially came into view. One entry read Wednesday, Cursed Energy Manipulation Practice, with a few rounds of target practice with piercing blood and shrine. A red circle and arrow emphasized the note with reminders to not forget and to do it for them, and there were photos of friends pinned nearby. Before Aizawa could study the rest, Itadori appeared behind him to say goodbye. Aizawa resumed his walk to the door, put on his shoes, and left after a final farewell. After walking for a while, Aizawa reflected on what he had seen. That brief glimpse into his student's room confirmed his suspicion that Itadori had been guarding his past and his abilities closely. Some of what the boy had said seemed suspicious or fabricated, and the whiteboard had deepened Aizawa's concerns. He had hoped for answers but found more questions instead. Aizawa chuckled to himself as he walked away. Following the conversation with Aizawa, the next week passed in routine school days. The upcoming UA festival had granted the students free reign of the school's training installations, and most of them took advantage of the opportunity to sharpen their quirks. The peach-haired boy warmed up in the gym with Shoji, stretching before hunting for the heaviest weights available. He found a colossal barbell in the back and decided to bench press it out of curiosity, but it failed to push him to his limits. Itadori told Shoji that he would go to the USJ to find something heavier to train with and wished him a good day. Shoji nodded and returned to his own setup. After Itadori left, Shoji checked the label on the massive barbell and discovered it held 1,500 kilograms on each end. He admitted to himself that Itadori might outmatch him in raw strength and resolved to train harder for the festival. Itadori walked toward the USJ and past classmates preparing for the festival. Ida ran laps across the PE grounds, his exhaust trailing behind him, and Kaminari practiced his electric quirk, rubbing his chin with a playful, tired expression. They waved as Itadori increased his pace toward the ruins zone. At the ruins, Itadori searched for a suitable piece of rubble to lift and ultimately decided to slice out a portion of a 3-story building. His careless use of cleave destabilized the structure. The building toppled in a dramatic anime-style collapse, sending a thunderous shock through the training ground and raising a cloud of dust. Itadori leaped away and emerged from the smoke, brushing dust from his clothes with no visible injury. Uraraka and Ishido hurried over, concerned. Uraraka inquired about what had happened, and Ishido asked if Itadori had caused the collapse. Itadori explained that he had gone looking for something heavy because the gym lacked adequate weights and had attempted to cut a piece of the building to train, not expecting the whole thing to come down. He told them that he had used a form of blood manipulation to cut it, a claim that Achiko accepted at face value while the others grew skeptical. Achiko felt a pang of sadness, interpreting their doubt as a sign that Itadori did not trust her. Ishido suggested asking their teacher if he knew of a place with suitably heavy objects, and Itadori agreed. He then asked what the two of them were doing there. Uraraka explained that she and Ishido were training together. She levitated debris with her quirk while Ishido practiced striking it with her acid, so Uraraka could get used to handling objects just beyond her comfort zone. Itadori said he would see them later and ran off. Left behind, Ishido looked unexpectedly downcast, and Uraraka asked if something was bothering her. Ishido admitted that she felt Itadori was being secretive. She said they spent a lot of time together, but he often hid things, and the building incident had made her even more suspicious. Uraraka defended Itadori, pointing out that he had saved them and was kind and welcoming. Ishido replied that she had known him the longest among their circle and recalled first meeting him when he had looked roughed up and out of sorts. She had suggested showing him around after that encounter because he had not seemed like a threat. Uraraka asked whether Ishido had ever seen him like that again, and Ishido could only shake her head. She remembered a recent hospital visit when she had tried to ask how he had regrown his arm. Instead of answering seriously, he had laughed it off and said he was just used to it. That odd shrug had stayed with her. Uraraka advised Ishido to reflect on why she cared so much before pressing the matter, and then teased whether her interest might be more than curiosity. Ishido reacted with a flustered, emphatic denial, denying any romantic feelings and insisting she simply wanted to understand. Ishido admitted that she was worried Itadori was bottling everything up and that he was acting as if nothing had happened, and she looked away from Uraraka's teasing gaze as she said so. Uraraka teased back with a few giggles, pointing out that Ishido always watched Itadori at lunch and had once been so distracted she had nearly face-planted into a door. Uraraka then offered, with a laugh, that she would be a supportive wingwoman if Ishido ever decided to act on her feelings. Ishido chuckled and resolved to see what might happen in the years ahead. Some time later, Itadori walked around the main building of UA looking for Aizawa. He spotted the customary yellow sleeping bag on the classroom floor and called out to his teacher. Aizawa muttered that he had hoped for some quality sleep, then rolled over to face his peach-haired student. Itadori apologized and explained that he wanted extremely heavy weights to train with. Aizawa asked if there had been anything heavy enough in the gym, and Itadori said the gym's equipment had not been tiring enough for him. Aizawa suggested that since Itadori needed something exceeding 1 ton, a visit to the support department would be necessary for safety reasons, and he gestured for Itadori to follow. Aizawa walked with Itadori through the halls to a large metallic door. As he opened it, a loud, dramatic burst of sparks and smoke erupted from inside in a brief, chaotic flash. When the door was opened fully, they saw a girl with dreadlocked hair, goggles, and a utility belt busy at a workbench, surrounded by snatches of mechanical parts and devices. She waved off Itadori's concern about safety with a confident smile and moved the device back to her desk. A man wearing a massive helmet that resembled an excavator appeared and asked what was happening. Aizawa explained that his student needed a special invention from one of the support department students. Itadori declared that he needed something really heavy to train with. The man pointed to the tinkering girl and suggested that Hatsum could create special high-density weights. Aizawa left them to discuss the details. Itadori introduced himself and asked for help, but Hatsum remained focused on her work for a moment before spinning around in her chair to face him, coming extremely close before stepping back. She impatiently demanded to know what he needed while juggling several tools at once. Itadori said he required very heavy weights. Hatsum listed common weight options and then froze when Itadori explained he needed 5 tons or more. She reacted with surprise and admitted that her normal creations would not be sufficient for that request. The woman cheerfully told him to come back tomorrow and she would try to create something like that, though she could not promise anything, then spun back to her desk and began working. Itadori replied with a hesitant thank you and walked away, leaving the studio. After the interaction, he left the school and decided his other training should focus on jujitsu. He walked toward the abandoned playground, a place where he could use his abilities without being seen. Today he wanted to try something different instead of failing at flowing red scale for the 100th time. He decided to make a list of what he had learned. He picked up a stick and began to write in the sandbox at the back of the playground. He listed techniques such as convergence and dismantle, but as he wrote he realized he had reached a roadblock in cursed energy efficiency and reinforcement. After a few moments of thought, he identified something he had only used a handful of times and remained a complete amateur at: barrier techniques. During the 1-month training PRD before the Shinjuku confrontation, Itadori had trained with Kusakabe. After a session that involved switching bodies, the Grade 1 sorcerer Kusakabe decided to teach him more of the fundamentals of barriers. As Itadori tried to create a simple domain, Kusakabe observed, looking for flaws to point out later. The barrier fizzled and Itadori collapsed onto his back, exhausted from hours of using cursed energy. Kusakabe told Itadori that learning a simple domain in the limited time they had would be difficult, because barrier work required mental sharpness and the careful construction of internal and external parameters, things that were hard to achieve in the middle of a fight. He explained that practice was only one part of a barrier, visualization was crucial. He used domain expansions as an example, saying domains often recreate familiar daily images that sorcerers use to form them, but that an innate domain, the embodiment of the person or curse, was what truly brought the domain into the world. A domain expansion, he said, was only obtained through a personal breakthrough. Itadori looked confused and Kyuzuke sighed, then advised the peach-haired boy to remember what he had said if he ever wanted to create one. Back in the rundown playground, Itadori recalled that teacher Kyuzuke had told him to visualize the barrier. He walked to the middle of the sandpit, clapped his hands together, took a deep breath, and spoke the two words he had only ever said in his world when everything had been destroyed, invoking the phrase domain expansion. He focused, preparing to see what would happen next.